Hello, welcome to another edition of Prove All Things. I want to thank everybody who's joining us today, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or on the CGI Digital Network app, whether that's on your television, phone, tablet, or whatever way you choose. We thank you for joining us today. We'll let you know as you're watching, and we'll remind you a little bit later. This is a pre-recorded program. We will come back live next week, but this is still pre-recorded. But still, give us your comments and your and your ideas, and we'll address those in future episodes. I'm joined today though with co-host who is in California today. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, Jeff, doing well, doing well. Hey, it's our first show of 2023, I guess. So,
Yeah. This is
wow,
our
man,
our third
another
year of
year.
broadcasting. Our third year. We're starting a new year.
It's hard to believe that we've been doing it that long. Yeah.
Yeah, we it's really exciting to be a part of something that I think we're finally. I feel like I'm finally now feel like I'm getting good at it.
Okay.
Kind of good
Yeah.
at it. Kind of good at it. I mean, probably still not there yet, but I feel more comfortable with this format and how we're doing things and bringing on guests than when we first
Yeah.
started. I don't know about you. I feel a little bit better about how we're putting things together. I think we got most technical issues solved, at least for now.
Yeah. I think you're right, Jeff. It's getting like brushing my teeth now, regular basis. I feel
Yeah.
comfortable with it. We could always do better, I'm sure, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
we've reached our running leg stage, I think. So
Yeah, yeah. So I was at the Winter Family Weekend this past weekend for me, and it was quite an adventure. We had some busted pipes and some power outages, and
wow.
a lot of
How many
extreme
how many
cold.
folks were up there,
I think maybe
roughly?
300 or 400, so not as many as
Okay.
normal.
Yeah.
Some folks couldn't make it because for us we had to
The
drive
wet
through
the
some ice
weather.
to get there. It was we made it. We drove slowly. We followed. You get behind another car, you drive behind them. You do your best when the roads are icy. But we got there. Uh, we almost didn't go, but we decided that you know what are we going to do that weekend? Just sit at home, do nothing. So it's good to be
Hmm.
among the brethren. Good to have the different seminars that are there that we had, and great Sabbath services and activities, and even with all the technical difficulties, I would say the Church of God pulled together and made it like a wonderful Winter Family Weekend. And we get criticized that we're somehow doing Christmas when that's farthest from the truth. We don't even think about that. We're just thinking about God's people and and what we and what we can do to be together and to worship Christ, to worship Jesus, and but be there, having that community, which is really good to do it whenever we can and when we have time off.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Of course, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was there, I was able to give a seminar, and the seminar was on the Migdal Eder. I probably
Oh
mispronounce it
yeah.
every time I do it, which I completely took the notes that Skip gave here. I took those notes, and then I put some polish on it and added a few pictures, and I think I got a couple of quotes, and people, they really really liked it. So I want to bring on Skip Martin and thank him for making that easy for me, because that was very easy to be able to do a seminar using someone else's notes, which I've never done before.
Yeah.
But it was, it's one of the things like, why reinvent the wheel if it's already there? I can just put it all together myself, and it's going to probably even look the same.
Right, right.
How you
Yeah,
doing,
and
Skip?
it's such an interesting subject that it's speculation, but yet there's so much symbolism. And for those of you who don't know, Migdal Eder is translated Tower of Flocks,
Hmm.
and it's where the shepherds were most likely that were watching the sheep that were going to be taken to um, Jerusalem for sacrifice, and they were when they were born, they were wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. That might sound familiar to some of you.
Yeah, and you wrote an article about this that was for CM, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, they'll be sending it out pretty soon. And when I write an article, it's Jeff, as you saw my notes, it has to be edited very heavily. So I have
You're
no
not the
idea what
only one.
yeah, I have no idea what that article looks like.
Yeah.
It'll be fine, Skip. It'll be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, and hopefully, you'll give us permission. We'll put it on our CGI site as well in the future for folks who want to read it online and want to get to it that way.
Oh, well, you have my permission. I don't know if you need CEM's permission or not. I don't think so, but
Yeah, I'll ask their
um,
permission.
never
Always
hurts.
as courtesy because they're good folks there.
Maybe for the IN, or you want to put it in a blog form, or what do you want to do?
Was that
Possibly in the blog, and maybe give it to Vance for the IN as well because I know he's always needing that type of material that's out there. But today we got a completely different subject that Skip's going to present today, and I guess is another one of these controversial subjects that you like to bring out and get everybody in trouble and
that's
have
right.
people send us questions or like what do you put this guy on here for?
Yeah. Our subject today is in completely the opposite direction of Migdal Eder. That was about a wonderful messianic savior, our Messiah. This is about one of the most evil people that's ever been born. It's on the spirit of Jezebel, is what
Okay.
I want to talk about. And as I told you all a few minutes ago, there are, and I don't know if this is hyperbole or not, I'm going to say hundreds of different articles and YouTube presentations that you can go and look at that are very, very interesting. And I would say three-fourths of them are pro that there really is a spirit of Jezebel, and I'll cover the three different ways that's looked at. And three-fourths of them are pro, and about a fourth of them are negative. That there's no such thing, and all that. So that's the approach of these kind of things, or the approach I take.
Mm-hmm.
These things are interesting to talk about. They may be accurate. They may not be accurate. They're not salvation issues. It's just something that we need to be aware of, or might want to be aware of. So
Let me say you say there's pros and cons about this. So I'm interested that the spirit of Jezebel is a real spirit. Are you saying like an evil spirit, like a demon or something? Or are you saying that Jezebel somehow lives on and her spirit like inhabits people or something? I mean, what are you saying about the spirit of Jezebel as far
yes,
as that?
yes,
Yes, yes, on all that, huh?
yes.
Okay,
It's
so there's different
all
ideas.
of the above, all of the above.
Okay.
I'm actually going to mention that in a minute. I've got that in my notes. But before we get into that, I think I need to give a little bit of a history of the the nation of Israel. We've been going through the series on the prophets since last January. It's been a year now. And our Sabbath morning uh, uh, discussions last anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. So on Wednesday night, what we're doing now is we're going back through those, but I'm cutting all of them back to an hour without cutting any major stuff out of them. So anyway, we've got two series going on at the same time. So I want to talk just a little bit about the history of the northern tribes. This happened in about 900, mid 900 BCs. The unified nation split into two groups. Now, normally I would have given Jeff a PowerPoint, and I'm delinquent on that. So there's a few scriptures in here that I'll mention, but I'll paraphrase them, and Jeff can bring them up if he wants to. Before the split, God sent Ahijah the Shilonite, a prophet, to a man named Jeroboam, and that name should be familiar to most of us. And he told Jeroboam, "I'm going to split the nation of Israel into two parts. I'm going to give you 10 tribes, and I'm going to give the south one tribe, but the one tribe, which was Judah, was joined by Benjamin. So that made two in the south and 10 in the north.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find that in 1 Kings 11:29. I don't know if you want to bring that up or not, Jeff, but um, it amazes me. This is one of the mysteries, the great mysteries of the Bible, in my opinion. God Himself gave to Jeroboam 10 tribes, His people, to lead. And the first thing Jeroboam did was start throwing out the holy days, and we're not sure. We speculate that he may have changed the Sabbath. He changed the Feast of Tabernacles from the seventh month to the eighth month,
Mm-hmm.
and he immediately began leading them into idolatry. Unlike King David, who never allowed the people of Israel, the united kingdom, to worship any of
Mm-hmm.
the pagan gods. So the first scripture is 1 Kings 12:27 through 30. And like I say, you can either bring it up or not. I'm going to paraphrase it. It says, so the king consulted and made two golden calves, and he put one of them in Dan, way up at the top of the northern tribes, and he put one in Bethel, which is right on the border of Israel, the 10 tribes, and Judah, the 12 tribes. And he said, it's too hard for you to go to Jerusalem. Yeah, there we go. It's too hard. Let's see, in 28. The king took counsel and made the two calves, and he said, it's too hard for you to take the trip to Jerusalem. So I'm going to put these two golden calves here in the northern tribes. I'm going to put one of them up at Dan, so the people in the north can, just a short trip, and I'm going to put one in Bethel, so it's a short trip. And Bethel was right on the border of Israel and Judah, and so I don't really know how they did this. It happened the same way with Aaron and Moses, where they said, well, we're not really worshiping this calf. The calf represents God,
Mm-hmm.
and so we need something to look at. And it's the same thing. A lot of churches have
Yeah.
statues and things, and they would say the same thing. We're not worshiping that statue, and so on. But anyway, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then in 1 Kings 13:32, uh, there's a
You know what? When people say that say I'm not worshiping this statue or I'm not worshiping this image, I just ask the question. Well, what would they do if I were to go to that statue and like chop it down with like an axe or set that picture on fire? Would they think that it was some kind of sacrilegious or something? Because if they feel something towards that image or towards that statue would me like destroying it, then they're worshiping that image because they're putting some value on it. I think.
yeah, down in Mexico, there's a statue. I'm not sure of who it is. I don't want to get into being negative about other churches, but there's a statue down there that the people crawl on their knees for a long way. I don't know how far, but anyway, and they kiss the feet of this statue, and they've practically worn uh, the iron or steel or whatever it's made of. It's almost been worn away because so many millions of people have done this and rubbed it and so on. But anyway, um, we don't do that.
Yeah.
We don't have any statues. We don't have any idols or anything to
Mm-hmm.
symbolize the worship of the one true God, which is what we feel that we are certainly worshiping. Okay.
Something that's happened in our churches, though, Skip, is that men have become idols to some people, and that's something we need to be careful of. And
Yeah.
I think you're going to touch on that a little bit in what you're saying here today.
Yeah, and the men that have become idols, and we don't. I don't think Church God International and the independent churches that we affiliate ourselves with don't have those men anymore. But when those men were found to be fallible, church splits. We've all been through them. Some of the people, no, that's God's man. I'm going to stick with him no matter what he did. And some of the people say, no, I'm out of here, you know. So anyway, that doesn't have anything to do with my subject, but yeah, you're right. I will get into it. But these events that Jeroboam did, the putting of the two calves up there, the bringing in idol worship into the northern tribes, brought about a cliche that has been used. I think it's said about 14 times of different kings of Israel, and in 1 Kings 14:16, this may be the first time that it's mentioned. It says that God will give up Israel on account of the sins of Jeroboam, which he committed and which he made Israel to sin. This was the sins of Jeroboam, and this is said about 14 kings of the northern tribes. I don't think it's said of any of the southern tribes. And in yeah, there it is. And in 2 Kings 13:2, it's talking about another king. It doesn't matter which king he's talking about. Said, I guess my wife has a timer on. 2 Kings 13:2, he did evil in the sight of the Lord and followed the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, with which he made Israel sin, and he did not turn from them. This is speaking of another king. But this is the kind of stuff that's said about 14 of the kings of the north. None of the kings that preceded King Ahab, and we're going to talk about Ahab and his wife and his daughter actually today, none of them did anything to reverse the sins of Jeroboam. They never brought the people back to the worship of the one true God.
They just stayed. They just stayed in the idolatry. They stayed in the false religion.
Yeah, it's more fun. You know, if you look, go back to the Council of Jerusalem of Acts 15, and and they were talking about these things. What was happening is they were going into the temples, and in the temple they could drink blood, they could eat meat sacrificed to idols, they could have sex with temple prostitutes, and these kind of things. And they never stopped this in the north. So now 5 kings later, after Jeroboam, we come to Ahab's father Omri. And I love to say Omri was Omri. He was not only did Omri walk in the sins of Jeroboam, but this was said about him in 1 Kings 16:25. This is not something that you want said about you. Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord and acted more wickedly than all who were before him. Going back to Jeroboam, 5 kings before him, I think it was 5. For he walked all in the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and in his sins, which he made Israel sin, provoking the Lord God of Israel with their idols. And the thing about it that was so bad about this is not only did the kings do it, they made the people do it. They made it so convenient. They made it fun. They did everything they could to get the people to worship any god, other little g's, any god, or Elohim, little e's. Yeah. Blake did the program on the Unseen Realm several months ago.
Right.
They did anything they could to keep the people from worshiping the one true God. And Omri was worse than all the kings of the north up to his time. That's not something you want said about you. So now we come to his son Ahab. If not for Ahab, Israel might have gone back to the worship of the one true God. Might have. Didn't.
Yeah.
Didn't even get close.
Right.
But he made other choices that made this impossible. In 1 Kings 16:30, it says, Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. So Omri was worse than all the kings before him.
Mm-hmm.
Ahab was worse than his dad, which made him worse than all the kings before him. But Ahab did something else. He
Yeah.
did something else that was even worse. And in 1 Kings 16:31, it may be right there. Yeah, it is. It came to pass, and listen to this. This is big. It came to pass as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, like it was no big deal. He took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians. Now, this is Sidon, it's in Phoenicia,
Mm-hmm.
and he went and served Baal and worshiped him. This was a new thing.
Yeah.
This made it worse than anything that any king had ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time that Jezebel's name is mentioned in the scriptures. And the author makes it a point to tell us that Ahab marrying Jezebel was worse than everything that had happened before.
So why would that be worse if we know that, let's just take Solomon as an example, marrying foreign women, having temples to those foreign gods created. Isn't that the same thing? Why is it worse, Skip? What am I missing?
It's the same thing. It's kind of like, this is a crazy analogy. It's the difference
Yeah.
between shooting somebody in the arm and shooting somebody in the head.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. But is it because it's Baal or what? Or what? Why? Help me
Okay.
understand.
Jezebel's dad was Ethbaal, and he. I got to find myself in my notes. Ethbaal, Jezebel's father, was a king of Sidon and a priest of Baal and a priest of Astaroth. And he said also, and I'm sorry, and their worship was closely allied, and Jezebel was raised in this environment. Her
Okay,
dad was
so the dad is actually a priest of this false god too.
he's
That's
king.
different.
He's king of Sidon, and he's the high priest of these
Okay.
false gods.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
So
Yeah.
she's raised in this system. Not only is she raised in the system, but she's a princess and she's a priestess of these Baal and Astaroth. Now, there's this may be a hyperbole again, but there's hundreds or many Baals that are worshipped, and Baal means Lord, and it's
Mhm.
also pronounced Baal, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
I've spent 40 years saying Baal. And so this marriage to this woman who was even more evil than any of the wives of Solomon, but with Solomon, he brought these wives that he married for political purposes as a general rule.
Mm-hmm.
He brought them in, and he and she worshipped these gods, but he didn't let the people. So we've taken this a real big step
Mm-hmm.
in the future, where now the people are encouraged. And the first thing that Ahab did when he married Jezebel, and by the way, it appears that his marriage to Jezebel was by choice. It was
Mm-hmm.
not a political move. She must have been a beautiful woman. And so he brought her down. And the minute Jezebel got into the northern tribes, things started changing. And Ahab built a temple for Baal, and he built an altar for Baal inside that temple.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a result of Ahab marrying Jezebel,
Mm-hmm.
she began her manipulative ways, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, if I ever get to it.
Okay.
She was a master manipulator. She could get her way, and so she brought with her, or when she got there, she trained 850 prophets to either move away from the one true God, or she brought them from siding with her.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got 850 prophets priests and prophets in the northern tribes that are now worshiping these false gods. And
Mm-hmm.
if you remember from your times past, when we see a split in our church, when we've seen a split, half the people go with the pastor, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
she
Usually.
brings 850 of these prophets down here. Where do you think the people are going to worship? They're worshiping these new gods,
Yeah.
Baal, Astaroth, and so on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's probably a good majority. Maybe it was it with that, but we have some scriptures. I can't put my finger on them that do say there was a remnant of people still in the northern tribes who did still worship the true God that were in there. It's just
Yeah,
that there's this majority kind of start becoming this majority influence, and really
yeah,
coming from the leadership.
and we will find in a minute. I've got a couple of scriptures that show that they were made to be so uncomfortable that they went back down to the south.
Yeah, there was the people from the tribes who were uncomfortable went to the south and were part of it. Yes.
Yeah, well, the Levites and the descendants of Aaron, the priests
Yeah.
were not able. They were not allowed to worship
Hmm.
anymore, and so they went back down to Judah.
Hmm.
So okay, so you asked me a question a while ago, and I said yes. There are
Hmm.
three ways to look at the three ways that I know of to look at this concept of the spirit of Jezebel. One, there's no such thing, and there are several articles and YouTube uh,
Yeah.
things. Okay, two is that it's a person that has the characteristics of Jezebel, manipulation and so on, which we'll get into that. And the third is that there's actually a demon
Hmm.
in the hierarchy of demons that we know exist, where someone is possessed by a spirit, which is a spirit of Jezebel. Well, I'm not going to dwell on that too much,
Hmm.
but I want to talk about the second one. About this is an attitude. This is the characteristics of this woman
Hmm.
Jezebel that uh, we find them in businesses, we find them in church splits, we find
Yeah.
them, all over
I,
the place.
I kind of think there's a parallel to our country that we live in that we have we have leaders, and we have leaders who uh, really they influence a lot of what the people think. And so if like a leader accepts a certain position, say leader accepts gay marriage, that for most people were against it, but once the leaders started accepting this, all of a sudden it becomes more and more people accept these things, and then they move on to something else that was a sin, that was wrong, that they accept. And it seems like there's a spirit of Jezebel at work sometimes in our country, as far as going the wrong path, or it kind of where people get misled. I don't want to say anybody specific or whatever, but I'm just saying it seems to me I kind of see that kind of like how things are progressing in our country, as people started out being disobedient. I don't think we've ever been a country of obedience, but now I think we're to a point where there was always some people who were obedient to God, but now it seems there's less and less of those remnant people who are obedient to God, and we have more and more people who are going on to these worldly gods or
Yeah,
ways.
we have what we call the deep state,
Yeah.
which these characteristics are in the deep state. Now, one thing, when I was back at working at the bank, once a year, our savings and loan league would get together and go to Washington and talk to the senators and the congressmen and all of that. And one of the things that I found over the years is that the senators and the congressmen changed, but their staff didn't. I'd go to a Republican, we'd go to a Republican congressman, and we'd meet the staff and kind of get to be friends with them. And then 2 years later, I'm up there at a Democrat's office, and there's those same staff members in there, and that's what we call the bureaucracy. The
Mm-hmm.
bureaucracy is not the senators and the congressmen; it's their staffs. Well, anyway, I don't want to get into
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
but I mean, but there is in our country. We see that the country is pushing people towards things we don't want. In other words, most of the people at a time did not want to turn on the television and watch like two men kiss or something, right?
Right.
That's not something I don't want to see that. But it seems like that kind of they ease that in. You know, there's like a spirit of whatever it is where it gets put on people. The leaders accept it. Yeah, people in news say, "Oh, if you're not applauding these people for their braveness in this performance of this person who's on this thing, you're just evil." So, in other words, there's this kind of shift in the country where what was once known to be evil, which was against God's laws, they begin accepting, probably like Baal, and it becomes like it's kind of that we're going on that road to where like the next king is worse than the previous king, and the next king is worse than the previous king.
Yeah.
Whatever. And we don't have kings, but we do have a bureaucracy. We have governments. It doesn't matter what party they are; they all seem to be moving in that direction, whether faster or slower.
Yeah. And then at the same time, we have the cancel culture and the
Yeah.
woke
Yeah.
things. If you don't accept this, and in commercials, and thank goodness for fast forwards on our remotes. But in the commercials, there's getting to be more male kissing and so
Yeah.
on in the commercials. And Diane made a comment last night. Who wants to watch this stuff? But anyway, so
But what happens, and this is what's happened in our country, and I know this is probably, but this is probably taking a little away from what you're saying. But what's happening? I think about the spirit of Jezebel or the spirit of iniquity that seems to be there. Is that by now people like if you don't accept that, like you don't, they're like I think I heard there was an actress who said we're because the Hallmark Channel used to have family programming on it. You remember the Hallmark Channel? And now they have a lot of the LGBTQ programming, and so that's what that's become. But this other actor said, "Well, we're starting a Christian channel, and all we're going to have is family programming on it." And which is like, hey, we have a right if you're you want to have your own family programming, do that. But people were like talking about how evil she was and hatred and bigoted to have a TV pro channel that only has shows about families that are traditional. So we're at a point, and unfortunately, the younger generation is getting brainwashed in this thing where we're like that Israel, the northern tribes. We're like that right now in a very
yeah,
similar way.
and you didn't name her name, but Cameron uh,
Yeah,
Hooray.
Bure, yeah,
I didn't name her name because I can't pronounce it. So.
yeah, yeah. She's really good about. She keeps that stuff out of everything
Yeah,
that she does, and her brother is um, another one that does the same thing. Well, anyway,
But
yeah,
yeah, but that touches on what Skip's getting to. There's this two steps forward, but one step back because there's a little backlash against that in our country right now. But once that dissipates, you'll see we're going to keep drifting as we go. Change
yeah.
doesn't happen like that, but it does happen,
Hmm.
and it will happen. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so now this has kind of been the introduction to, I don't know how long we're going to be going today. You may have to cut half of my stuff out, but
Well, we could do a two-parter, Skip. So
okay. Well, I'd like to address the second of these things that it's a the characteristics of Jezebel are um, adopted by people where maybe they're not possessed. I don't want to go that far, although I firmly believe that happens.
Hmm.
But anyway, and it causes a person to act in a certain way. And I may touch on the possibility of demonic presence, but typically I'm going to just go with the characteristics in people. Um, the term spirit of Jezebel is used to describe someone who uses cunning, deception, or seduction to tear apart marriages, churches, businesses, and even governments. And this is what we were talking about a while ago. We're
Hmm.
seeing this. The Jezebel spirit, or the spirit of Jezebel, Doesn't have to be the leader. They have to be the what's the term? An influencer.
Influencer,
Yeah,
yeah.
an influencer wants to control the leader. And I tell you, not wanting to get into politics, but I believe that's what we have going on right now with our the leadership of this nation. And this spirit operates in a very subtle and sinister way. And the deep state is a good example of this. Okay. Now, the Bible doesn't use the term Jezebel spirit or spirit of Jezebel. And that's why I say this is not a salvation issue. This is, let's put it in the speculation category, but yet we see the results of some of these characteristics. Um, to see the attributes of this spirit, we need to look at the actions of the person that it's named after, Jezebel. Let's take a look at Jezebel. Now, Jezebel was a worshiper of demons. She was a worshiper of idols, but behind those idols, as you all remember from when Blake went through that unseen realm, that there are demons that are behind these idols, and they do influence the people. And it was all that Jezebel knew. She brought all of her beliefs down from Sidon, from Phoenicia, just like we would if we wanted to start going to a Protestant church. We would take our beliefs with us. Maybe not to go in and cause trouble, but we'd still have those beliefs. And I have attended a Baptist church here, and I go to a Baptist Bible study every Wednesday morning, and my beliefs are all with me, and I've told them about them.
Yeah.
And they know what I believe, and we don't fuss, we don't fight. It's a great Bible study, but wherever you go, you're going to take your beliefs with you, and that's what she did. Now, one of the lords or Baals of Sidon that Jezebel brought with her was the Elohim, little e, Molech. And Molech was a demon that required human sacrifice, an activity particularly hated by God. And here's what God said about it in Jeremiah 19:5. And this, to me, this is one of the biggest things we see God say. He said, and they have built high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire. This is from Jeremiah 19:5. I'm sorry, Jeff.
All right.
And it built high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal. And here's something that God says: a thing which I never commanded, and it never even entered my mind. God Almighty is telling Jeremiah, write this down. I never even thought those people would go that far. Now, we know God knows everything, okay? But I'm a firm believer that there's some things God didn't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
When he came down, or Christ came down to look at Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, I want to go down there and see if what I've been hearing is really true. And so, it may be possible, and I think it is, that sometimes God says, I'm not watching that stuff. And so he goes down to find out it was true. And this is a thing he said, I never commanded, and it never entered my mind. That's verse 5. And I tell you, that scripture just blows me away, that God never even thought they would go that far. Okay, so God says this evil activity never entered his mind. But when Jezebel married Ahab, she moved into his palace, almost immediately convinced Ahab to build a temple to Baal, so she could continue to worship her gods from Sidon. And then she brings in 850 prophets. And believe me, 850 prophets can't fit in one temple. Well, depending on how big the temple is.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, we know that there's stuff going on up in Dan. There's stuff going on down in Bethel. We know in that Samaria was the capital. There was stuff going on there. Jezreel was where the summer palace of the king was. You know, and you had Baal worship and Molech worship all over the place up in the north. All right, 1 Kings 16:29. Well, we've already done that. Don't worry about that. It says
Okay.
Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all that were before him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's saying a lot. I mean, going back to what Jeroboam did to start it, and then let me get my little chart out. You had Jeroboam the first, then you had Nadab,
Mm-hmm.
King Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Tibni, and then Omri, and then Ahab. You had
Mm-hmm.
all of these kings that kept moving the people further and further toward the worship of Baal and Astaroth and so on.
And I guess like the human sacrifice, that's just the ultimate evil to just kill people on these altars to these gods.
Yeah, there's a scripture, I didn't put it in here, where and the timing is interesting, and I'm not sure 100% about this, but it says at this time did the king of Jericho rebuild Jericho, and he buried his firstborn son in the foundation, and he buried his secondborn son under the gates. It implies that this is happening at the same time that all this stuff is happening in the northern tribes, and you can look that up. So Ahab had already allowed pagan worship, or continued that pagan worship from Jeroboam,
Mm-hmm.
including his father. But verse 31. 1 Kings 16:31, and I may have already mentioned this, forgive me if I did. It came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam. I think I did mention this earlier, that he married Jezebel. I think this is what Mike was asking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It was so much worse when he brought Jezebel in, and she brought her gods in, and she brought in these pagan priests, and practically forbade the worship of the one true God in Israel, in the northern tribes of Israel. Um, and he wasn't really
Because I
worshiping.
guess at first they still could worship the god, but they were promoting these calves and worship. But it got to a point where they said you no longer can worship God.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
said,
And it was, whether it was actually stated, but they were made so uncomfortable
right.
that they left. And so it even worsened when he married Jezebel. And verse 32 there in 1 Kings 16:32, you don't have to bring it up. It says, he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Now, Samaria was the capital of the northern tribes that Omri had moved from. Well, I can't remember, but anyway, he bought the hill of Samaria from Shamar and named it Samaria, and that was the capital of the northern tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a lot worse. 1 Kings 16:33 says that he made a pole, and you all have heard of the Asherah pole. He made a pole that was used in the worship of the goddess Asherah, and this made the Lord very angry. And Ahab did more to make God angry than all the kings of Israel that had gone before him. Ahab lots. get my tongue untwisted. Ahab had lots of wives and concubines that the scriptures don't tell us about. You know, Ron Dart used to say, God didn't put everything in the Bible; He just put the important stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, everything's not in there. Every single king that died, there's a comment that's made after them that says, and the other acts of this king, are they not written in the book of the Chronicle? We don't have that book. It's gone. And there's all kinds of stuff that we could be reading about. And I'm not talking about First and Second Chronicles.
Yeah.
This is another book that we don't know about. But he had 70 sons. Now the scripture does say that. And I'm sorry I didn't put the scripture in here. But Ahab had 70 sons. And I guarantee you 70 sons were not had by Jezebel.
That's kind of impossible to do that.
Kind of impossible. But the evil influence of Jezebel permeated every aspect of worship in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know all the evil acts that Ahab did. You know, back to what Ron said, God didn't put everything in the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
But here are a few of them. First, as mentioned in verse 31 that we had a minute ago, bringing the pagan worship from Sidon, from Phoenicia, down and introducing it in Israel, and practically forcing the people to worship those gods. And we aren't really told much about this next thing, but apparently a part of her purge of the worship of the true God, she murdered the prophets of God. Now, it doesn't tell us how many, but 1 Kings 18:4 says that Ahab's servant Obadiah, not the one that wrote the book, it was his servant Obadiah, who was apparently a good guy, apparently a worshiper of the true God, but he saved 100 of the prophets of God. Well, if he saved 100 of them, she must have killed a whole bunch more than that. And so she's eliminating all of the worship of the God of Israel from Israel.
Right.
Okay. That's in 1 Kings 18:4. You don't have to turn there, but that's where it talks about Obadiah saving those 100. And so there weren't many priests left in Israel, the priests of God left in Israel, as many had moved back to Judah. And if you'll bring up 2 Chronicles 11:14, Jeff, it tells us that the Levites left their pasture lands and their property, and they came to Judah and Jerusalem. They were forced out of the northern tribes. And this takes us back to Jeroboam, who started this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just blown away that the man who God put over 10 of his families that were his people, he almost immediately said, no. We're not going that route. We're going to start our own religion up here. How could he have done that?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's not my subject. So we're all familiar with Elijah's battle with the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Ashtaroth up on Mount Carmel, and how 850 of them were killed. Did that scare Jezebel? No, it didn't scare her at all. Now, I think I would have been scared. I sent my best people up to prove to the nation of Israel that the worship of these pagan gods, well, she wouldn't have called them pagan, but the worships of these gods would have defeated the one prophet of the other God, and put him down, and then we can finally get rid of this worship of this, what they think is the true God. But that didn't happen. not only did he defeat them in the, with the fire coming down and burning up his sacrifice, and nothing happened over at the other one except that they danced around and they jumped around and they cut themselves, and I mean blood was flowing from these 850 prophets of Baal and Astaroth, and I wouldn't
Mhm.
doubt that some of them didn't bleed to death. I mean, they were cutting themselves with swords and everything, and Elijah's over there laughing at them. And I
Mhm.
didn't put that in my notes, but he said things like, "Well, maybe he's on a trip. Maybe he's
Yeah.
tired. He's probably taking a nap." Uh, and if you go back and read those, it's absolutely hilarious
Mhm.
what Elijah is yelling at these guys, and the more he yelled, the worse they cut themselves, and the worse they jumped around. But did this, and then as soon as all of that was over, and he called fire down, and God burned up his sacrifice. Not only did he burn up his sacrifice, but they put about 20 or 30 gallons of water on the calf, on the stones, in the dirt, and in a trench that they built, and God burned all of that up. Every single bit of it, God burned up. Did that scare Jezebel? No. After Elijah had Jezebel's prophets killed, he was afraid of what Jezebel was going to do to him. Now, this is another thing that's kind of amazing, but Elijah, being a prophet of God, he was also a human being. And when he was threatened, when his life was threatened uh, by Jezebel, he was afraid. And in 1 Kings 19:1, uh, by the way, this is when the rain, when he brings rain back. It's been 2.5 years. And he told Ahab, he said, "Hey, Ahab, you better get on the road because the road's going to get muddy and your chariot's going to get stuck. So you better hit the road." And so he did, but Elijah girded up his loins. In other words, he took his robe and he brought it up, and he folded it up in his belt, and he outran Ahab in his chariot for the 20 miles or so
Mhm.
from Mount Carmel to Jezreel. And so Ahab gets there and he goes in, and very sheepishly, because Ahab is scared to death of his wife. I'm scared of my wife, and she's nothing like Jezebel.
Mhm.
Um, he told, I'm not really scared of my wife, but you get the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he goes in, and I'm sure very sheepishly he's saying, "Oh, honey, you're not going to believe what happened up there. Um, your prophets danced around and cut themselves and called fire down from heaven. And by the way, one of the Baals, he was the god of thunder, and the god of thunder would also be the god of lightning. So
Mhm.
it had happened before, because these Elohim were real. It had happened before that lightning had come down and lit the sacrifices, but not this day.
Mhm.
God said, I'm putting you boys over in the corner." And so she comes down, and Ahab came down and he told Jezebel, "You're not going to believe what happened, honey." And it was all Elijah's fault. He blames the whole thing on Elijah. And so then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah. And apparently she still believed in her gods at this time, because she said in verse 2 of chapter 19, she said, "So the gods may do to me, or even more, if you're not dead by this time tomorrow." Now, maybe on the other hand, she knew that her gods were useless and they couldn't fulfill this vow. But we don't really know which way it was going. So Ahab got scared, and he took off and he ran down to Beersheba. And I apologize for not having my PowerPoint today because I would have shown you how far Beersheba was. It was down about the middle of the southern tribes, about the middle of Judah. And it says he left his servant there. And this is the first time we hear about Ahab having a servant. Now, it may have been one of the sons of the prophets, which is mentioned quite frequently once we get studying about Elisha. So Jezebel's next act was the murder of Naboth. And we're told in 1 Kings 21 that Ahab, who is the king of Israel, okay, he's a powerful man. He went to Naboth and said, "Oh, look, you've got a beautiful vineyard out here, right? You know, I look out my window, and there it is. I want it, and I'll buy it from you, and I'll give you another place that's even better." Verse 2, "Give me your vineyard that I may have a garden for herbs," because he could smell the herbs, because it's near my house, and I'll give you a better vineyard, and I'll give you money. And Nadab said, "No, the law says that God gave me this land and I'm not supposed to sell it to anybody." Um, so Ahab goes back like a whiny little baby and goes in and throws himself on the bed, and he's whining and crying that, "Oh, I wanted to buy that land of Naboth, but he's a mean old guy and he won't let me buy it." And so Jezebel, and this is one of the characteristics of Jezebel, she sets up this big dinner to celebrate Naboth, and she brings in some lowlifes to sit next to him to accuse him of blaspheming Ahab and so on. Verse 10, it says, "She set two men, the sons of Belial, before him to bear witness against him, saying, 'You blasphemed God and the king.'" And I found that interesting that the writer capitalized God. So she may have been saying, he blasphemed the God of Israel, not my gods, but this other one. And then you all need to carry him out and stone him that he'll die. And that's what they did. She manipulated this action to get rid of Naboth so Ahab could have his garden. One of the characteristics of Jezebel. Now, not long after this, Ahab is killed. Now, Ahab is killed, I can't remember if it was 10 or 14 years before Jezebel was killed. So, um, uh, in a battle with Syria, now the New American Standard Version calls Syria Aram. If you read about Arameans, it's talking about Syrians. But Ahab is killed seemingly by accident because in 1 Kings 22, it says, "Now a certain man," just somebody, "drew his bow at random and fired an arrow, and it struck the king of Israel in a slit between his armor." And so he told the driver, he said, turn around. I'm severely wounded." And the battle raged that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot in front of the Syrians, and he died that evening. And the blood from the wound ran in the bottom of the chariot. And if you remember the scripture, it says the dog licked up the bloods of Ahab. But now Jezebel lives for, I can't remember if it's 10 or 14 years. Now, I couldn't put all the scriptures in here, so I'm paraphrasing and I'm telling you what they said. But God had anointed a man named Jehu much earlier and gave him a mission. And the mission was to destroy the entire family of Ahab. Now, Ahab is already dead, but he's got 70 sons out there. So when Jehu came to Jezreel to take care of Jezebel, some say she put on makeup. Well, the scripture says she put on makeup and dressed up. Now, I contend that she did this to seduce Jehu. Good looking woman. She puts makeup on, she puts her best clothes on.
Mm-hmm.
And if that was her goal, it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So Jehu began the destruction of Ahab's family right here. Uh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself, but before uh, uh, Jehu came to Jezreel, he ran into Joram, who was the son of Ahab, who was reigning as king at this particular time. And he said, "Is it peace, Jehu? Are we going to be able to get along?" And Jehu answered and says, "What peace? How can we have peace?" This is in 2 Kings 9:22. "How can we have peace so long as the harlotries of your mother, Jezebel, and her witchcrafts are so many?" Two more characteristics of this woman, Jezebel. And in verse 22, it says that he drew his bow and with full strength he shot Joram between his arms under here. It went in, it went into his heart and it killed him and he shrank in his chariot. Now, Jehu, and this is speculation on my part, Jehu seemed to get a little bloodthirsty. And he started killing everybody that he got around that wasn't part of his cadre or the good guys in Israel. Said uh, he may have enjoyed killing a little better than he should have, and it seemed to have irritated God. Now he allowed him to go ahead and kill the family of Ahab, but I think it irritated him. So Ahaziah, who was the king of the south, he was king of Judah, had come up to see his cousin. And I'll tell you, well, he was the cousin because Ahaziah was the son of Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah. We'll talk about her a little bit in a minute. When Ahaziah saw that the king of Judah was killed, he fled. And he had a bunch of people with him, a bunch of soldiers with him, and they shot him too. So they shot him at the ascent of Gur, which is at Ibleam. I don't know where that is, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. Okay, so not only did Jehu kill the son of Ahab and Jezebel, but he killed the cousin of the son of Ahab and Jezebel. Now, I don't have time to get into the whole thing, but this caused something really, really strange to happen in the southern tribes. Ahaziah's mother was Athaliah, who was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And Jehoshaphat, who was the king of Judah, was a good king, but he did something really, really stupid. He had his son Joram marry the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. He should have known better, but he didn't. So Athaliah was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and she was his counselor. Think about this: the wicked The Wicked Witch of the West, coming from the Wizard of Oz. The Wicked Witch is counseling her son, her grandson, um, to do all of the things that Jeroboam had done, to teach the worship of Baal in the south, in Judah, and it started taking on. And it says that Ahaziah, in verse 27 of 2 Kings 8, it says, he walked in the way of the house of Ahab. Now, this is a king of Judah, not supposed to be doing this stuff. He walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab had done. So the same thing's happening in the south because Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, is his counselor, is influencing him. It says because he was a son-in-law of the house of Ahab. Athaliah was Ahab's daughter, Jezebel's daughter, married to Joram. So he's the son-in-law.
So is that a spirit of Jezebel in a sense? Could you argue? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, she raised Athaliah. Well, how did she raise Athaliah? To be just like her. And I've got a scripture in a minute that shows that she was maybe even a little worse. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can get worse than Jezebel.
Yeah.
But Second Chronicles 22, Jeff, if you can bring that up. Second Chronicles 22:2. It says Ahaziah, who is the son of Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel, was 22 years old when he became king of Judah. And he reigned 1 year. He didn't reign long. He reigned 1 year. Hey, that's nothing. Some of the kings of the north reigned they didn't reign long enough to get their cards printed, as I like to put it.
You said chapter 22, 2 Chronicles 22.
Yeah.
It says 40 and 2 years old. You said how old?
Are you in 2 Chronicles 22:2?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another scripture that says 22. That 42, some believe is a mistranslation, or it could mean that the 42 years was the reign of the house of Omri, since his mother was Athaliah was the daughter of Omri. That there's some connection there to the reign of the house of Omri. That was a 42-year reign when we get to this king. I wrote a blog on this. I just put it out on a church website. It addresses why there's 42 in one verse in Chronicles, and in Kings, I think it says 22.
And it depends on the translation, I presume. I'm reading from the NASB, and I don't know, Jeff, do you know what translation you got?
That's the King James Version right there.
King James Version. Okay. Well, as you all know, it doesn't really matter, does it? Whether he was 22 or 42. Yeah. Yeah, it's better if you can check various translations and see which one is more accurate, or go to an interlinear Bible, which is a pretty accurate way to look at it. But anyway, he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, it says, and his mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. Omri is Ahab's dad. So and he also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, the king of Judah. No, don't do this. For his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. So the daughter of Ahab was the counselor of the king of Judah. So here we go. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of his father, to his destruction. Okay. Now, 2 Kings 11:3, and we're going to talk a little bit about Athaliah here. I don't know how much time we've got, because I didn't.
Well, we're at an hour and 10 minutes, so we probably need to wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so, because we don't usually go over that.
All right. Well, let's talk about Athaliah, and then if y'all want me to come back, I'll be glad to.
I think we're going to come back because we haven't even got the Revelation yet.
That's right.
So,
That's
so
right.
to pull this together. So yeah, all right.
So you're a prophet. You know that I'm going to get to that verse in Revelation, don't you? All right, 2 Kings 11, 1-3. Let's talk about Athaliah for just a minute. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, okay, when she found out that Jehu had killed Ahaziah when he was up in the north, she rose and look what she did. The first thing she did was to kill or have killed all of the descendants of King David. Now, I'm not through, there's a however here. What did God tell David? You shall never want a descendant to reign on your throne.
Mm-hmm.
So Ahaziah wants to put a stop to that. She's influenced by Jezebel, and she wants to wipe out the whole reign. I mean, all descendants of David. It says that she rose and destroyed all the royal offspring, but Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, okay, so Joram wanted to kill too, but his daughter, uh, uh, the sister of Ahaziah, the priest, the high priest, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, stole him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and placed him in his nurse in the bedroom. So they hid him from Athaliah, and he was not put to death. So he was hidden in her house of the Lord. What is that? The temple.
Temple.
Why would the temple be a safe place to hide the final descendant of? It's because she never went there. She didn't worship in the temple of God. And by now, the temple is beginning to become a relic, a library, because people aren't going in there. But for 6 years, Joash was hidden while Athaliah was reigning over the land. And so, if you want, we can stop there. If you all want me to come back, I'll be glad to. And
I think you're going to have to because we just really got this the beginning
that's
of
right.
this.
That's right. We've
So,
got.
we're going to talk about the spirit of Jezebel. We're just getting about Jezebel, and so let me just
Yeah.
ask you. So, what are some things we can look forward to, and when we discuss this second part?
Well, I have a list. Well, we see Jezebel killed, and then I'm going to talk about the Jezebel in Revelation. And then I have a list of the characteristics of the spirit of Jezebel that, again, can just be a characteristic of a person, or it could be a demon, or like some people say, it may not exist at all. I don't buy that. I'm kind of more of the second and a little bit of the third.
Yeah.
And many of us over it. Now, I can add a whole lot to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just the thing to wonder. Well, I guess we'll talk about it in the future. Is the Jezebel mentioned in Revelation that I think was what Tyra that if this Jezebel was an actual person named Jezebel or they were acting like Jezebel. So
Yeah,
that we don't really get that. We just we just have the the name Jezebel given. And
well,
that's something we'll look forward to.
I use the word metaphor a lot
Yeah.
in that, talking about uh, Jezebel in Revelation, because there's some things that could be accurate. She could exist. It may be a metaphor, and so on.
Yeah.
Skip.
Yeah,
how does January 17th look for you? I actually have an opening on that day.
I'm sure it's okay. Let me see.
That would kind of get this done without too much time in between.
So that's 2 weeks from this. 2 weeks from this program, then would be perfect.
Yeah.
Well, now I contend nobody's listening to me anyway, so it really doesn't matter how far out it goes. Tuesday the 17th is fine, but that's a Prove All Things Day.
Yeah, that's what we're doing here.
Oh, do it live.
Yeah.
Do it live. I'm not used to you all wanting me to do things live because you can't cut.
We'll give it a shot if you're okay, Skip. I'm going to mark that down.
I am fine.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
So for
Skip.
everybody
Appreciate it.
for everyone who's joined us today, and I'm sure you have questions and you have comments, and we want you to join us live in 2 weeks. This is schedule with Skip Martin, and we will cover the rest of this and get your comments and what you think about Jezebel. I'm really interested to hear what everyone thinks, and to see those comments that will come in 2 weeks.
Okay, one thing real quickly. There's a 9-minute video that I watched this morning that's really good by this guy. Would it be okay to play that?
I'll look into it. Send me the video, and I'll see what we can do.
Gotcha.
All right.
All right.
So we'll say goodbye to everybody, and we'll see everybody
right.
next week on Prove All Things.
Thanks, guys. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.